The pronouncement from the flight attendant was cool, dismissive, and lacking any human kindness. "Sir, I must inform you, this seat is no longer assigned to you." He gave a simple, accepting nod. Though a four-star general would later label that single statement an act of staggering national ignorance, at that moment, 88-year-old John Miller was just a man being told he was out of place. He had embarked on this journey with a solemn purpose. A veteran of 2 wars, John Miller had boarded the aircraft with his first-class ticket in a hand marked by the passage of time and the weight of experience. He was traveling to Washington, D.C., to attend a ceremony for the last survivors of his old combat unit, an event that promised to be thick with memories and ghosts. His attire was functional and neat, not fashionable. A simple tweed jacket over a pressed shirt, clean but well-worn trousers, and a faded military cap that rested on his head as an integral part of him. It was a testament to a life of service, its insignia weathered by decades of the elements. He made his way into the hushed, almost sterile sanctuary of the first-class cabin, a realm of cushioned luxury, complimentary champagne, and the quiet murmur of privilege. Locating his assigned seat, 2A, brought a brief wave of relief. The ample legroom would be a small kindness to knees that were a permanent reminder of a long-ago jump into Normandy and a back that had carried fallen brothers through the frozen Korean landscape. He started to lower his frame into the seat, the welcoming give of the cushion promising a comfortable flight. That was when she approached, a flight attendant whose smile was a polished veneer that didn't reflect in her eyes. "Pardon me, sir," she said, her voice a carefully modulated professional monotone. "Are you Mr. Miller?" John straightened, his movements unhurried yet firm. "Yes, I am." She glanced at a tablet, her eyes flicking from the screen to his simple clothes and aged cap. A shadow of judgment, quickly masked, passed over her face. "There has been a necessary seating adjustment, Mr. Miller. This seat has been reallocated to accommodate an operational need." The sterile corporate language was a convenient shield for the simple truth. His seat was being given to someone else, someone the airline had deemed more worthy. John looked from her impassive face to the seat he'd paid for, and back again. He wasn't a man who sought conflict. His entire life had been shaped by duty, by following orders, and by enduring hardship without a word of complaint. He could have presented his ticket, could have referenced the confirmation, but he saw in her eyes it was a closed matter. The decision was final. "We have your new seat arranged in the main cabin, row 34, seat B. If you would kindly follow me." Thus, John began the long, silent walk from the front of the plane to the rear. It was a silent ordeal of averted glances and deliberate indifference, each step a small chipping away of his dignity. He passed the spacious seating, the clinking of glasses, and the relaxed expressions of people in a world he had helped secure, but in which he no longer seemed to belong. The sting of being dismissed was an old wound, less acute than a battlefield injury, but, in its own way, more persistent. He finally found row 34 and wedged himself into the narrow confines of a middle seat. He put his small carry-on bag, the one holding his dress uniform for the ceremony, into the overhead compartment and settled in. The engines began their ascent to a roar, the cabin lights dimmed, and the plane prepared to move. John rested his head against the uncomfortable seat, the rough fabric a stark contrast to the promised comfort. He closed his eyes, not in anger, but in a quiet, profound weariness. The great irony, unknown to anyone on board, was that they had just cast off a man who carried the Silver Star for heroism in his pocket, a man who had once held the destiny of thousands in his capable, weathered hands. The seat was a rigid cage. John adjusted himself, his knees firmly pressed into the seat ahead, a world away from the comfort of 2A. Dignity, he knew, was carried within, not bestowed by one's surroundings. So he had acquiesced quietly, his silence a bulwark against the indignity of it all. He adjusted his cap, his gaze distant, his posture as upright as the tight space would permit. His eyes drifted toward the front, where the curtains separating the cabins swayed, offering glimpses of the world from which he had been exiled. He saw the easy confidence of young professionals, their lives illuminated by the blue light of screens. He saw the sense of entitlement they wore so effortlessly, a birthright never earned. And in that moment, John felt the crushing weight of his history. It wasn't fury that he felt, but a deep and melancholy nostalgia. The ache in his back was more than age. It was a physical ledger of his service, a reminder of frigid nights on the ground in Korea, of carrying a wounded comrade from miles through enemy lines. His knees, protesting every shift, held the phantom memory of 1,000 marches, of scaling cliffs under fire, of kneeling beside friends who would never stand again. These were not mere pains. They were ghosts. Ghosts of battles won, promises honored, and a world that had seemingly forgotten the cost of its own freedom. Beside him, a young woman in her 20s, Sarah, kept stealing glances at him. She was listening to music, but something about the old man's resolute quietness had captured her attention. He hadn't fought back or complained. He had simply accepted his downgrade with a grace that seemed to belong to another era, another code of conduct. As John shifted to ease a cramp, his jacket fell open. For a split second, the cabin light glinted off something tucked in his shirt pocket.
Sarah caught a flash of silver and enamel, the point of a star on a faded ribbon of blue and white. To her, it was just an old keepsake, perhaps a memento from a school victory or a club. She couldn't know she was looking at the Silver Star, one of the nation's highest commendations for combat valor. She saw an old man in a bad seat. She did not see the hero sitting next to her. But a flicker of curiosity had been ignited. She watched him for another moment as he closed his eyes, his face a mask of stoic endurance. He said nothing. For men of his generation, you bore your burdens in silence. Sarah could not shake the image of the old man's quiet dignity, which stood in such stark contrast to the casual cruelty he had just endured. On an impulse, driven by an insistent feeling that something was fundamentally wrong, she took out her phone. Her brother, Adam Thompson, was a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy stationed in Norfolk. He was her go-to for all military matters, a man who lived by a code she admired. Typing quickly in the dim light, she tried to be discreet. "Hey, strange thing on my flight. They just moved an elderly vet from first class to economy. He's sitting with me. His name is John Miller. He has some kind of old star medal in his pocket. It just feels so wrong." She didn't anticipate an immediate reply, assuming Adam was on duty, but her phone buzzed less than a minute later, the vibration startlingly intense. "Sarah, are you kidding me? John Miller? Silver Star? Can you get a picture? Do not let him see you." The urgency in his text sent a jolt of alarm through her. She risked a quick, angled photo of John's pocket, catching the corner of the medal, and sent it. The response was immediate, a rapid succession of texts that made her heart hammer in her chest. "Confirmed. That is the Silver Star, Sarah. Do you have any clue who you're sitting with?" Before she could reply, another message appeared. "That's not just any soldier. That is Master Sergeant John Miller. He is a living legend. The details are heavily classified, but his name is whispered with reverence in special operations circles. He didn't just fight. He altered the course of history." Sarah's face went pale. A cold wave of guilt washed over her as she stared at the unassuming man sleeping beside her. She had been a silent witness to his humiliation, had done nothing. Her own passivity now felt like a form of betrayal. Another text arrived, and this one stole her breath. "During Desert Storm, his unit was ambushed and cut off. The public story is they were wiped out. The real story: Miller single-handedly held off an enemy platoon for 12 hours, protecting a compromised intelligence asset. That asset had information that stopped a chemical weapons attack on 3 Allied battalions. He saved thousands of lives that day. Thousands! And the airline put him in a middle seat? The words on her screen burned with Adams' fury, an outrage that now mirrored her own. The flight attendant's polite dismissal, the indifferent passengers, her own silence, it was all part of a single unbearable act of disrespect. This wasn't just bad service, it was a sacrilege.
A fire ignited within her. This would not be allowed to stand. Her family was deeply embedded in the military community. Her father had served for 30 years, and their circle of friends was a constellation of high-ranking service members. She knew people who could move mountains. Scrolling through her contacts, her thumb hovered over one name: General Charles Adams. A 4-star general, a friend of her father, and a man who commanded with the force of a moral hurricane. She hesitated for only a second, then typed a message, her fingers flying with newfound purpose. General Adams, my apologies for the intrusion. I am on Flight 217 to D.C. A national hero, Silver Star recipient Master Sergeant John Miller, has just been publicly dishonored by the airline staff. I believe you know him. The situation requires immediate attention. She hit send. The message launched into the ether, a quiet act of rebellion from row 34. Now she could only wait. The response was not a text message. It was a tremor that ran through the entire aircraft. The plane had just been pushed back from the gate, the engine spooling up with a deep, resonant hum, when a sudden, jarring lurch brought it to a halt. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with confusion and a hint of alarm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. We are experiencing an unexpected operational delay at the gate. Please remain in your seats. We've been instructed to hold our position by airport ground control. An uneasy murmur rippled through the cabin. Annoyed sighs and frustrated glances were exchanged, but the collective impatience froze into stunned silence when the jet bridge, which had just detached, began to move back toward the plane, reconnecting with a solid, authoritative thud. The cabin door, which had been sealed for departure, was unlatched from the outside. It swung open not to reveal a smiling gate agent, but a wall of military discipline. Flanked by a dozen soldiers in immaculate dress uniforms who filed in to secure the entrance, a man stepped on the plane whose very presence seemed to alter the air pressure in the cabin. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face a roadmap of command decisions made in harsh sunlight and under immense pressure. The 4 silver stars gleaming on each of his shoulders identified him as a full general. This was General Charles Adams, and he moved with the unyielding force of a man accustomed to having the world bend to his will. The atmosphere on the plane shifted in an instant. The low hum of chatter died, replaced by a silence so profound you could hear the soft whir of the ventilation system. Laptops were snapped shut, phones were lowered. Every eye in first class, then business, then the entire economy cabin was fixed on the uniformed figures at the front. The flight attendant who had dismissed John approached, her professional smile now a strained, nervous mask. "Sir, I'm sorry, but boarding is complete. You can't be on the—"
"I am General Charles Adams," he interrupted, his voice not loud, but carrying the weight of absolute authority that cut through the sterile cabin air like a razor. "This aircraft is not departing until I have a word with your captain and your chief purser. And you," he said, his gaze locking onto the flight attendant, "are going to tell me precisely why a recipient of the Silver Star was removed from his designated seat on my authority." The flight attendant's composure shattered. The blood drained from her face, and her corporate training offered no script for this scenario. A seating issue, sir. There was an overbooking." "I am not interested in your seating issues," the general stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that resonated with pure, controlled fury. He took a step forward, his polished boots silent on the carpet. "I am interested in why one of this nation's highest decorated combat veterans was treated with the kind of disrespect that I wouldn't tolerate for a raw recruit in basic training. Now, where is he?" Sarah, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of terror and vindication, felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke into the charged silence. "He's back here, sir, in row 34. General Adams' eyes found her, and he gave a single sharp nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention back to the aisle. He began to walk, his entourage of soldiers remaining at the front like silent, unmovable sentinels. His progress was a slow, deliberate procession through a sea of stunned faces. Passengers craned their necks, their earlier indifference replaced with a mixture of awe and dawning shame. The general walked past the first-class seats, his gaze sweeping over the occupants, who now shrank from his view. He passed the curtain into the main cabin, his presence turning the narrow aisle into a stage. He finally stopped at row 34, his large frame filling the space, casting a shadow over the seats. John had been awakened by the commotion, his eyes now open and alert, taking in the impossible scene before him. He recognized the face, aged by time but still carrying the same fire he remembered from a dusty command tent decades ago. General Adams's expression softened as he looked down at the old man. The thunder of his command voice was gone, replaced by a tone of profound, unwavering respect. "John," he said, his voice clear and firm echoing through the silent cabin. "It's Charles Adams. On your feet, Sergeant." He then amended the command, his voice softening further. "John Miller, I demand that you come with me." It was a commander's order, but it was layered with the plea of a friend and the deference of a soldier to a hero. "You will not spend one more second in this seat." For a long moment, John Miller did not move. He simply looked at the four-star general standing before him, a specter from a lifetime ago. Then a spark of the old discipline, buried but never extinguished, took hold. With a slow, deliberate motion that defied his 88 years, he pushed himself up. He was no longer a dismissed passenger. He was a soldier rising to a command. The entire cabin held its breath, watching in a heavy, reverent silence. General Adams placed a steadying hand on John's shoulder, a gesture not of assistance, but of solidarity. He then turned and began to lead the way back to the front of the plane. The walk was a powerful inversion of John's earlier journey, where before there had been averted eyes and quiet contempt. There was now a sea of wide, stunned, and deeply ashamed faces. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft footfalls of the two veterans on the carpeted aisle. It was a procession of honor, a public restoration of a dignity that should never have been questioned. Upon reaching the first-class cabin, General Adams did not immediately let John take his seat. Instead, he stopped, turned to face the entire plane, and let his gaze sweep across every passenger. His voice, when he spoke, was not the angry bark of a commander, but the clear, resonant tone of a history teacher, giving a lesson that would never be forgotten. "For those of you who witnessed what happened here today," he began, his voice commanding the attention of every soul on board, "I want you to understand what you saw. You saw a man who has given more to this country than most of us could ever imagine. You saw a man wearing a silver star." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "That medal isn't given for participation. It is awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, for singular, life-threatening heroism." He gestured toward John. "During a mission in the Gulf War that remains classified to this day, Master Sergeant Miller's unit was compromised. He held the line when no one else could. His actions that day directly saved the lives of thousands of soldiers and civilians. He fought for the very freedoms you enjoy, the freedom to conduct your business, to travel, to live your lives in peace, blissfully unaware of the sacrifices made on your behalf." His eyes settled on the first-class cabin.
This man is not looking for a handout. He is not asking for your pity. He is owed your respect." He then gently guided John toward seat 2A. "He has earned his place at the front of this plane. He has earned his place in the history of this nation." As John finally settled into the plush leather seat, a single passenger began to clap. It was a hesitant, solitary sound in the thick silence. Then another joined, and another, until the entire plane, from the front row to the very back, erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It was more than a polite gesture. It was a collective apology, a standing ovation of gratitude and shame. John simply nodded, his eyes glistening slightly as he looked out the window. He reached into his pocket, and his fingers closed around the cool metal of his medal, a private communion with a lifetime of duty. Sarah stood near the aisle, tears streaming down her face, tears of guilt for her own silence, and of overwhelming gratitude for the justice she had just witnessed.
The plane finally took off into the evening sky, its atmosphere fundamentally transformed. The flight attendants, their faces pale and etched with regret, came to offer their deepest apologies. John accepted with a quiet nod, his grace making their transgression feel even greater. The journey continued in a state of humbled reflection. Before they landed, General Adams made a call from his satellite phone. The conversation with the airline CEO was brief, icy, and non-negotiable. The fallout was immediate. The next day, the airline announced a new company-wide policy, effective immediately, the Miller Protocol. It guaranteed automatic upgrades and premier treatment for all decorated veterans, ensuring that what happened to John Miller would never happen again. Deeply moved, Sarah found her calling in the event. She began volunteering for veterans organizations, dedicating her life to ensuring that the stories of heroes like John were told and that their dignity was never again left to the whims of corporate policy or public indifference. She had learned that respect isn't a transaction, it's a debt owed to those who paid a price we can never fully repay.